One of the great things about Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games is you can do just about anything. Unlike video games, where you play a character who can leap over bad guys and jump across dangerous pits, but when it comes to a 2-foot fence, they can't hop over it, because that 2-foot fence represents the boundary of the virtual world. So unlike video games, a game master, a human being, creative person, can push those boundaries, can create what's on the other side of that fence. They can do things that the adventure didn't expect the players to do. That's why we play Dungeons and Dragons. Man, that's a cool scene. But how would you adjudicate that at your table? How would you determine which mechanics to use, and how much damage would that do to the monster? I'm going to give you 3 simple tricks to help you rule the rule of cool. We had our final session of a Dungeons & Dragons adventure this week, and my players went crazy. Like, ridiculous, over-the-top ideas, and it was outrageous fun. We had a blast, but they clearly were pushing the boundaries of the rule of cool. So I'm going to use examples from that game session to show you how the rule of cool doesn't have to break your game. You can actually have a set of mechanics. I'm going to give you an example of 3 different mechanics that you can implement at your table in order to adjudicate the rule of cool, but still have balanced mechanics running behind the scenes. So the adventure I was running expected the players to negotiate with the gnomes and fight the dragon. My players, of course, did the opposite, and that's what I mean when we say players are going to test the boundaries of the adventure's expectations. My players decided to offer the gnomes giant lizards as tribute to the dragon. Then the dragon devoured those giant lizards, and the poor gnomes didn't survive. So after the dragon fed on the giant lizards, it's lounging there fat and happy, and the players look at each other and think, dragons have treasure hoards. He thinks we're his friends. We could attack him now and get the drop on him. Let's lock the doors so he can't fly away. So of course I describe this giant steampunk door slamming shut as pistons and gears turn, activating multiple lock mechanisms. And that's when the players realize, oh, we just locked ourselves in here with the dragon. And I think that's what set everything off. My players realize this is do or die time. Let's go all out. And the wizard player says, I want to use enlarge reduce to double the size of the ceiling and cause it to collapse on the dragon. Now, technically, enlarge reduce only works on creatures. So I could have said, no, it won't work on the ceiling. But then what would have happened? The wizard would have just picked some other spell from a spell list, probably upcasting Chromatic Orb to 3rd level, and blasting the dragon, doing something he's done multiple times in this adventure. But instead, I could rule of cool the ceiling expanding and collapsing and crumbling down upon them as a great introduction to this boss battle. So that's what I did. But how much damage would a crumbling ceiling do? That brings us to our first rule of cool trick. Whenever someone is using a spell to do something that otherwise wouldn't be able to do, you can just use the guidelines in the back of the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide. In the chapter on DM tools, it gives you a chart on how much damage spells should do. This chart is intended to help you design your own spells, but you can use these guidelines whenever someone's using a spell that doesn't usually cause damage, but in this situation they're being creative, so it should cause damage. You can reference this chart and know how much damage this creative thing should do. Now, my player knows that this is not the correct use of an enlarge reduce spell, so he offers to burn a 3rd level slot to make this happen. And since he's using a 3rd level slot, according to the chart, I can rule that this does 3d10 damage. Now, to make it exciting, I also explained to the wizard, the ceiling's 30 feet high, which is the range of the spell. So in order to make this happen, you're going to need to be in the room with the dragon. And the wizard's like, bet, let's do it. So they both roll their saving throw and fail. And the 3d10 damage puts a really nice hit on the dragon and sets up the combat in a really exciting way, but it also knocks the wizard out. So this created an extremely exciting introduction to our boss battle, something that otherwise wouldn't have happened if the wizard had just cast some other 3rd level spell that he's cast half a dozen times. This was unique and memorable, and the players are still talking about it days after it happened. So whenever your player wants to get creative and use a utility spell that wouldn't otherwise do damage in a fun and exciting way, you can use this chart to determine how much damage it would do. For example, casting Destroy Water on a water elemental, or using Tensor's floating disc to pile up a bunch of bricks and set a trap for the goblins. When the goblins walk in the room, they dispel the Tensor's disc and all the bricks fall on the goblins' heads. Likewise, when the bugbear charges, snarling, his nostrils flaring, and the smart-ass player says, I'm going to use Druidcraft to make the flower sprout inside his nostril. And then you can have fun describing the roots of the flower as it grows up into the sinus cavity of the bugbear, and the petals of the flower pop out of his nose. So since we're talking about Rule of Cool and other creative things you can inject into your game, check out Roll for Combat today. April 1st, the day this video comes out, Roll for Combat releases Battle Zoo Ancestry's Demigods. For the last 3 years, Roll for Combat has released a new ancestry for both Pathfinder 2 and 5e. These ancestries are outrageous and creative. Obviously, they're releasing on April 1st, but they are still game balanced. And I trust their design because Mark Cypher is a friend of the channel and we've talked about design before. I know Mark knows his stuff. So while these ancestries sound outrageous, they shouldn't break your game. 3 years ago, they started with the ability to play as the dungeon. Last year, they did fusions, where a group of players could play a multi-headed creature. This year, it's demigods. So if you want to play a demigod, check out Roll for Combat today. Sometimes, when a player comes up with a crazy idea, you're not really sure how cool it actually is, and you can kind of see how it would work, but you can also see maybe you should say no, you're not really sure, and this is where you can simply let the dice decide. Roll a dice, evens, you can do it, odds, you can't. So this brings us to another Rule of Cool example from this wild game session we had. The sorcerer died in the first round of combat, and I felt bad. I didn't want him to have to sit out the rest of the game, so I let him take over this shield guardian that was a part of the dungeon. And I introduced the shield guardian like this. You are not gnomes. You are not gnomes. Basically, letting all the players know that this shield guardian is there to protect any gnomes from any outside forces. So clearly, this shield guardian is going to be opposed to the dragon. But the player, now playing the shield guardian, figures out, well, they would also be opposed to the rest of the party. So now he lets the dice decide, does the shield guardian attack the dragon, or does the shield guardian attack his fellow players? Of course, he rolls odds and makes the combat far more difficult for his fellow players. Now, the cleric in the group looks at the shield guardian and says, you're not a gnome either. And that's when the shield guardian player now starts to roleplay an existential crisis. I am not gnome. I am not gnome. So once again, the player rolls and determines that the shield guardian is going to spend extra time in this existential crisis they're having. And that buys the rest of the party one more round of fighting the dragon without getting attacked by the shield guardian. Then the paladin gets a critical hit on the dragon, and the barbarian cheers, we are gnomes! We are gnomes! The rest of the party gets the hint, and all start chanting, we are gnomes, every time they hit the dragon. So once again, the dice decide the shield guardian buys the deception and helps them finish off the dragon. And opposed skill checks are a very easy way to resolve a situation when you're not really sure how else to do it. Even though opposed skill checks are technically not in the newest version of the game. I don't think that's going to stop most people from using opposed skill checks. The big question becomes, if you use opposed skill checks for some sort of combat resolution, how do you calculate damage? And this brings us to our third and final example from this week's game. After the players defeated the dragon at the Gnome's Fortress, they wanted to go back to the dragon's lair, of course, to get his treasure. But once they got there, they found a rival adventuring party trying to steal the treasure out from under them. And that's when another combat ensued. During that combat, Shield Guardian player grapples one of these treasure bandits and hoists them up in the air, and that's when the Barbarian player went nuts. He says,
"Now hear me out. While you got them grappled, here's what we're gonna do."
He flips his laptop around and shows this. That wrestling maneuver is called a Dudley Death Drop, aka 3D. Now, my players are stoked. They're super excited. And clearly, I can just make this an opposed strength check, roll your strength against their dexterity. No problem. But how do I calculate damage? This looks like if you did it for real on somebody, it would do a lot of damage. Now, I know the Barbarian does about 15 points of damage per attack and makes 2 attacks a turn. That's a total of 30 damage. So I can just make this attack do 30 damage, and therefore I'm in the same ballpark, and I'm not setting any dangerous precedents that's going to break my game in the future. Now, this maneuver is called a 3D, so of course, I'm going to tell him to roll 3 dice. Now, what 3 dice can get in the ballpark of that 30 damage? 3d12. That's right. I tell him, if you pull this off, you're going to do 3d12 damage. And of course, he rolls this opposed skill check, and he succeeds, and everybody yells 3D as he rolls 3d12 across the table. It was fantastic. It was a great moment in the game. So by approximating damage like that, you're supporting your player's creativity. Because the alternative is to follow too strictly to the rules and say, well, you're not proficient in these things, and an unarmed strike only does 1 point of damage plus your strength bonus. And that can leave the players feeling underwhelmed when they try to do something cool. So by approximating damage to the amount of damage they would normally do in a turn, you can reinforce the rule of cool in a fun but manageable way. Now, this video wouldn't be complete if we didn't come back to that Kraken attack. In this scene, we see the roguish character in red climbing the mast, tightrope walking across the rigging, and basically spends an entire turn setting up this attack. Likewise, the fighter, here in blue, he sees the rogue setting this whole thing up and uses his action and his action surge to do the same thing the rogue just did. Now they've set up this double piercing mast attack. So how would you approximate damage? Well, I would just create a dice pool of d6s. Normally, the rogue would make a weapon attack and add a couple of dice for their sneak attack. And then they would add a dexterity bonus. But let's not do the math on bonuses. Let's just represent that with an extra dice. So we'll take 4d6 damage to represent one of the rogue's actions. And he's spending 2 actions to do this. So now the rogue's dice pool is up to 8d6. Now the fighter would also roll a weapon die, plus an ability score, plus whatever feat or weapon specialization they might have. So we can easily represent the fighter's attack with 4d6 as well. But the fighter has multi-attack, so their one action could also be summed up in 8d6. And since they're using action surge, we can do that all over again. So now we're up to a total of 24d6. But even though that's a lot of damage, it's not any more than they would regularly do in 2 rounds of combat. Now you might be saying, but they're not always going to hit. Well, of course, that's why we give the monster a saving throw to represent that same kind of randomness. So they would roll 24d6, and if the monster made its saving throw, it would only take half of that. So this is a simple way to turn something extravagant into something you can actually manage at the table. And if you're wondering, well, doesn't that take a while? It doesn't really take that much longer than subtracting monster hit points during a combat. And if you turn to your players and go, whoa, that's crazy, give me a second to figure all this out, and you turn to your scrap paper and you're quickly scribbling down d6 after d6 to calculate how much damage this is going to do, that builds anticipation. The longer it takes you to do that, the more the players are like, oh wow, this could do a lot of damage. That is fun. And that's why we play these games. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time in the Dire Day.